So now we can install the motherboard into the case. For this we'll need the 4 thumb screws that we took out earlier. We're going to take the motherboard, just going to slide it in here. Before you do this, of course, it's good to have the I/O plate mounted to the case back there. We're going to skip that here for this demonstration. At this point you may also want to install your graphics card. For this demonstration we'll be using an air-cooled graphics card. You'll want to make sure your back plates for the PCI slots are removed, the covers there, and you should be able to mount that in the slot like so. It should lock down securely, and then you'll want to secure that with a thumb screw at the top here. So now that we have the motherboard installed, the next section of tubing we want to install is from the pump output here over to the CPU block input. And you're going to want to make sure that it is the input it goes to. So we're going to remove the lock rings on these fittings, and then we're going to take our tube. Again, we're going to measure a piece from the shoulder of one fitting to the shoulder of the other fitting. And it's good to have your RAM in at this point so that you can check the clearance on top of it. You don't want too aggressive a bend, you know, like obviously you could go with a really big section of tube if you want. You don't want to go too tight, otherwise you can run the risk of kinking the tube. Kinking would be when you bend the tube so much that it goes like that. You can see that's a kink right there, and it's going to impact flow. So you don't want that. So if we take the piece of tube that I cut earlier, and we put a lock ring over one end, we should see one piece goes on there quite easily. And then we'll put the other end on here. And you're just going to tighten these all the way down. We're going to finish a little early there, so it's not completely tightened down, but you should do that. At this point, we can then install the drop-in mount with the radiators in it. Before we do that, if you do have graphics cards that you're adding to the loop, we would suggest adding them and adding a section of tube from one GPU port down to the return compression fitting back here on the reservoir. Because we're not including a GPU in this installation video, because it's not included in the kit, we're going to hook this up to the return line from the radiator. And I'll go over that path again later just to explain what happens if you put a GPU in the loop. So if we grab our radiator drop-in mount, that's our piece of tube already installed in the middle. We're going to mount this towards the back of the case. You can see how easy this is now. All these fan cables are going to look messy for a little bit, but that's okay. Hopefully you've zip tied yours up. Just going to pull them out of the way for now. And you'll see there's a fitting up here. We're going to hook that guy up to the CPU line. So this is the output of the CPU, and the block is marked with output and input. And again, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take your tube and you're going to measure how long a piece of tube you need to the CPU block. I already have one. And don't forget, at the same time, you're going to have to secure the drop-in mount as well with the 6 screws that we talked about earlier. So we'll just loosely tighten those for now. You should, however, fully tighten them. And then we're going to talk about the return line. If you are not including the GPU in your loop, you'll see we have one fitting here. If the GPU is not in the loop, that fitting gets connected to this fitting over here for the return to the reservoir. If you are including a GPU in the loop, as I said, you're going to connect this one to one of the GPU ports, and then the GPU to this fitting right here. You will also need extra fittings. We only include enough fittings in the kit to make it work with just the CPU. So if you buy a GPU block, you're also going to need to buy fittings to go alongside with that GPU block. And for this case, I would recommend two 90-degree fittings in order to come up out of the block to here and one down to there. So like I said, if you do get the GPU block, make sure to get two compression fittings of the right size and two 90-degree fittings, and that should enable you to easily add your GPU in the loop. So if we add the last piece of tube, also one I've made earlier, and this is a longer section of tube, so it's a little harder to measure. You can see this one we made quite long. You could do it a little shorter if you want. So you're going to tighten those fittings down, and then all the tubing is plumbed up, or plumbed in I should say. So at this point, once you've secured all your fittings, this is ready for leak testing. And in order to leak test, what we're going to do is to set up paper towels around every place where leaks could occur. So that means around fittings, it means underneath things, it means close to the CPU block. Basically, you're putting paper towel in there so that if there's a leak, not only will that paper towel absorb the leak, so it doesn't get everything wet, but it's also much easier to see. If you have a leak that is quite slow or it's dripping, you may not necessarily see it unless it hits the paper towel, because it might run along a circuit board or something, and that can be really hard to see. So the paper towel really helps with that. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. So for example, around a fitting, you could try and wrap the fitting itself. It's not always that easy. I also like to put paper towel underneath such things. So for example here, just to make sure, and then if we turn it around, you can put it around the CPU block itself. You kind of want to get it as close to the bottom of the block as possible, so that if the block is leaking out the side, you want to be able to catch that and find that, because sometimes it will leak into the socket, and if you've only put tissue paper up here, it's not going to catch that. So we're going to continue fast forwarding and finish this up, and then we're going to take you through the loop filling process. Okay, so for the next stage, we're going to be actually filling the loop. So to do that, we're going to be pouring it into the top of the reservoir here. So to help with that, we're going to remove the top of the reservoir, making sure not to remove or loosen the cylinder. So the cylinder, you want to make sure it's still tight on there. A jug is really helpful for this, and you're going to take your coolant. This particular coolant is EK Blood Red. You're going to pour some into your jug. And the other thing that is really handy is a funnel. So we're just going to take our funnel and place it there so that it's going to fill up the reservoir. And then we're just going to pour in the coolant. And we're going to fill the reservoir until it's mostly full. You don't want to overfill it so that it pours over the top. Nor do you want to get too close to the top, because when you turn the pump on, it's going to kick up a little. So if you're feeling confident, you can leave the top off. Personally, I would close the top, at least partly, just so that there's no splashing when you turn it on. Now to turn it on, if you have a second power supply, you can use that, or you can use the power supply that you've put inside the computer. Make sure it's not connected to anything else. When we're leak testing, we only want to power the pump. So you can see here I have all the disconnected power cords from the power supply. We're only going to connect one of them, the one that goes to the pump. Then we're going to hook up the power supply cable, which you can see here, to the house power. And then we're going to use this little jumper cable. This connects to the 24-pin cable that you'd normally connect to the motherboard. We're going to connect this guy with this, and that's going to turn on the power supply, which will turn on the pump. You want to make sure that, of course, that the switch to the power supply on the back is turned on. So when we do this, we should hear the pump kick on. So you can see the level is reducing in the pump there. And in a second, I'm going to stop it. And the reason I stopped it is because the water in the cylinder went down. And you don't want the pump to run dry. In other words, you don't want the water to run out. The pump is going to suck all that water down, and it's going to push it through the loop. And if the pump just gets fed with air because it's run out of water, then it can overheat and die. So once the water gets to the bottom of the cylinder, we're going to turn it off, we're going to open it up, and we're going to fill it again. And at this point, well, to be honest, even before you turn on the pump, you probably want to check for leaks as you go. Every time you turn it on, you probably want to look around and make sure there's no coolant coming out anywhere. While colored coolant makes it easy to see where the leaks are, it's harder to clean up. Again, we're going to fill this close to the top. We're going to put the lid back on. We're going to look around for any leaks. We don't see any. So we're going to put the jumper back on. And there the pump is spinning up. And you can see the level starting to fall. And there we go. It's at the bottom again. So we do it again. The more radiators and the more complicated your system is, the more times you're going to have to go through this process of starting the pump, refilling the reservoir. So that's why the bigger reservoir you have, the easier your job is. Now once the cylinder is mostly full and the pump is still running, because you're not kicking on the pump on and off, you can actually refill it while it's working. And at this point, most of the air is out the system already. However, there'll be bubbles coming through. And so what you're going to do is let the system run like this, and just every so often for the next period of time, you're going to keep coming back and checking this. So at first you'll come back after a couple of minutes, and then after 5 minutes, and then after 10 minutes, then after 20 and 30, and then an hour, and then 2 hours. And you probably want to let, the rule of thumb is generally 24 hours. And after that 24 hours, if all of your paper towels are dry, there's been, no dampness around any of them, you've got a pretty good idea that there will be no leaks. Now you've left your system running with the pump going for 24 hours, and you've refilled the cylinder reservoir as it's kind of dropped low. So you now should have a system that's very much bled all the air out of the loop. So at this point we can unplug the power supply, and then we can remove the jump start little thing we had there. And when you can go ahead and plug in all the rest of your power supply cables, you can mount your hard drives, you can put everything else in there and hook it up as you normally would. You'll also need to hook up the front panel here. The other thing you'll want to do before you turn on the computer, of course, is to remove all your tissue paper. This was only for the leak testing. You don't need to have it in there anymore, so you can take that out. And then the very last thing to do with the kit is to use the final PWM splitter cable. This one should be a 4-to-1, and you'll notice that there's a separate power molex. The power molex here is going to go to your power supply. Then there'll be a female end, and that will go to the motherboard. Then you'll have 4 male ends, and those will go to the remaining PWM splitters that you had for the fans up top. So you had 2 3-to-1s there, so that's 2 of those. Another one will be used for the 7th fan that you get in the kit, and that's going to go in the back as an exhaust fan. And the 4th one here, that goes to the pump, because the pump is also PWM controlled. So this means you're going to have a total of 7 fans and 1 pump that all get fed by the same PWM speed controller. And that's plugged into the motherboard. So with your motherboard, most motherboards these days will have control in the BIOS or through speed fan software or something else to let you control the speed of all of these fans and the pump at the same time, which means you can turn it down if you want it to be very quiet, or you can turn it up if you want performance. The last thing to note on this cable is there is one with a little white sticker around it which says with fan speed signal. When the motherboard reads the speed signal back from the fan, it only takes it from 1. So this 1, you want to go to a fan. You can connect it to a pump, but the pump spins at much higher RPM, and so we'd advise you, because some motherboards can't read as high as the pump goes, we'd advise you just to connect that to a fan, and it will be easier for you to understand, and the noise will be more linear therefore. So that's the last cable to attach. Like I said, with the last fan in the back, this one you're not going to use any of the screws that came with the radiators. To mount this guy, you need to use the screws that came in the box that came with it. There were 4 self-tapping screws there. And if you want to run this as an exhaust fan, again, you're going to position it with this side kind of on this side of the case. And so the sticker side is going to be out. You're going to see it from the back of the case. And that means air will be pushed out the back of the case. If you prefer it the other way around, you can mount it the other way around. It doesn't really matter. And that's really it. At that point, the whole thing is built. If you do have any questions, leave them in the comments. We may not have got absolutely everything covered. It was a long and detailed video, and we wanted to do it that way so that there weren't any mistakes, and we hopefully have left you with no questions at all. But if you do, we'd rather you put them in the comments so that we can answer them and future readers can also see the answers. If you like to know more about water cooling, then follow our channel, extremerigs.net. We also have a website, extremerigs.net, We're on Facebook, Twitter, all the usual stuff. We do a lot of water cooling reviews. We like to think we're one of the most scientific sites out there in terms of quality of water cooling reviewing. And we also do other stuff too. So subscribe to the channel and we'll see you around.